My parents sold the vacation home I spent 12 years building, worth nearly $480,000. When I found the forged power of attorney, my mom didn't even flinch. She just shrugged and said, "You've always wasted money. We needed it for your brother's future." I just smiled, because what they didn't know about that house, well, that's the best part. My name's Daniel, and if you asked anyone who the responsible one is in my family, they'd point to me. I'm 35 now, working steadily as an architect, a career that's taught me to value precision, patience, and the importance of building things that last. Funny how life works, huh? I think a lot of us end up choosing jobs that fix something missing in our own lives. Maybe it's a quiet form of rebellion, or maybe it's just trying to bring order to the chaos we grew up in. My family? Oh, they've always been big on showy moves and quick wins, never the slow, methodical kind of progress I've come to respect. Their messes, their wild dreams, I was the one quietly cleaning up behind them. No praise. No acknowledgement. Just silent weight on my shoulders. I still remember chugging that terrible gas station coffee, bitter and burnt, just to stay awake during those long overnight drives in college. Not to cram for finals, mind you, but to knock out freelance drafting gigs that paid the bills. And those payments? They didn't go toward ramen or textbooks. Nope. That money went straight to mom and dad. Another one of dad's, can't-miss, investments had just flopped, and they were scrambling to cover their mortgage again. Then there was the time I was finally packing for my first real vacation. I'd been saving for over a year to hike through the Sierras. I had everything ready, backpack, gear, the whole deal. That's when Mom called. Her voice was this weird mix of panic and disappointment, like she rehearsed it. Zane, my younger brother, the so-called genius of the family, had landed himself in jail. Needed bail money. Just a silly mistake, Daniel, she said, brushing off the reckless driving and property damage like it was a harmless prank. I tucked my hiking boots back in the closet. That dream of fresh pine air and adventure faded away like smoke. That was the cycle. Zane would screw up, I'd be the safety net, and Mom and Dad would twist the story so it never looked like his fault. Still, in the middle of all that family chaos, I held on to one dream. A quiet one. A real one. Something I built with my own hands, piece by piece. The Pinecone Cottage. It wasn't just a house, it was 12 years of grit, saving, and late nights. A little pocket of peace I carved out for myself on the edge of Miller Lake. I stumbled on the place by pure luck. It was a crumbling, forgotten cabin, half-eaten by ivy, windows staring blankly at the water like old, tired eyes. It smelled like mold, damp wood, and old memories. But underneath the rot, I saw strength, the old beams, the chimney made of fieldstone, still standing like it had something to prove. The real estate guy thought I'd lost my mind. "It's a teardown, son," he said, shaking his head. But I didn't want to destroy it. I wanted to bring it back to life. That kicked off years of weekends lost to hard labor. Weekdays were spent obsessing over the blueprints I'd drawn myself. Every hammer swing, every board I sanded, it was my therapy. I taught myself plumbing. I wrangled the ancient wiring. I made sure the crown molding lined up just right, even when my hands were blistered and my back was shot. The smell of cedar and fresh paint stuck to me like cologne. I'd sit on that new deck in the late afternoon sun, already picturing myself as an old man, watching grandkids I didn't even have yet learn to skip rocks on the lake. That vision kept me going. Pinecone wasn't just a building. It was a part of me. My plan was simple, turn it into a small eco-retreat. Somewhere folks could unplug, breathe, and maybe find the same stillness I found there. But my family? They never got it. Mom, Margaret, was always polished, always playing the part. To her, the cottage was just an old dump. She never understood why I'd pour my energy and money into something that didn't come with applause. Over time, I realized her love came with strings. Everything had to fit her perfect picture of a successful family. Any time she made a decision that felt more like an order, she'd throw out her favorite line, "It's for the good of the family, Daniel. You'll see one day." Always sugar-coated, always final. Dad, Thomas, was a gentler soul. He once had dreams of his own, but after enough failed ventures, he lost his spark. Now he just kind of followed Mom's lead, hoping Zane would be the one to bring the family name back up. He rarely pushed back. Silence was his way of agreeing. And then there was Zane, my younger brother by 5 years, though you wouldn't know it the way our parents doted on him like he hung the moon. He was the golden boy, the one they always believed in, no matter how far-fetched his latest, big idea happened to be. He had this easy charm, the kind that let him spin any wild plan into something that sounded brilliant, at least to them. Work, though. That was never his thing. Zane treated hard work like it was contagious, he avoided it at all costs. He lived in this fantasy where he was already a tech mogul, and the rest of us just hadn't caught up yet. I remember the one time he actually visited the cottage while I was knee-deep in renovations. I was covered in sawdust and sweat, hands full of tools, and he just looked around with this smug grin. "Still messing around with your little dirt project, Daniel," he said, smirking, like all the hours I'd poured into the place were some kind of joke. Then, without missing a beat, he launched into this breathless pitch about a game-changing app he was dreaming up. But the moment that should have snapped me awake, really made me pause, came a few months before everything completely fell apart. Zane, in true Zane fashion, had cooked up another one of his can't-miss business ideas. This time it was some crypto-based social media platform that, according to him, was going to change the way the entire planet communicates. Of course, he needed a chunk of money to get it off the ground, fast. And surprise, surprise, my parents turned to me. It was over dinner. I remember the rosemary chicken Mom made that night. It was unusually heavy, almost too fragrant, like it was trying to cover up the tension in the room. The conversation steered, as it always did, toward Zane's brilliance. And his urgent need for funding. The pressure was like humidity in August, thick, inescapable. Zane looked at me with these sharp, expectant eyes, like he was already calculating how much I'd give. When I told them I couldn't just cash out my retirement, his face twisted slightly, like I was personally betraying him. Mom let out one of those long, practiced sighs, the kind she'd mastered over the years. "Oh, Daniel," she said, "you're always so careful. Sometimes you have to take risks if you want to win big." I gave in, a little. I handed over a sum that mattered to me, even though it was nowhere near what they wanted. The tension didn't ease. If anything, it turned colder, like something had snapped and no one was willing to say it out loud. That moment should have been a giant red flag waving in my face. But I ignored it. About a month later, I got offered an incredible opportunity through work, a 3-month project in Singapore that would have me overseeing a high-profile build. It was the kind of thing you work your whole career for. I said yes. I packed my bags, tied up loose ends, and left a spare key to my apartment, just the apartment, not the cottage, with my parents. They said they'd stop by to water the plants and check the mail. Just a normal, trusting gesture between family. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Looking back now, the irony hits hard. While I was busy laying the groundwork for someone else's future halfway across the globe, my own was being quietly blown to pieces back home. The first few weeks in Singapore flew by. The job was intense, long hours, tight deadlines, but I was thriving. I loved the challenge. The heat, though. That was another story. Singapore's humidity wraps around you like a wet blanket the second you step outside. Totally different from the crisp, pine-scented air back at the cottage. Still, the city pulsed with energy. There was a buzz to it, this forward-thinking vibe that resonated with the part of me that loved building things from the ground up. And for a little while, that heavy feeling I'd carried from that last family dinner. It started to fade. Until the call. It wasn't something I imagined, it came through loud and scratchy on an international voicemail. Mrs. Wilcox, my sweet, older neighbor who lived near Miller Lake, had left me a message. Her voice sounded small, a little nervous. "Daniel, dear, it's Nora Wilcox. Just thought you ought to know. There've been some folks hangin' around your place. Kinda, settled in, if you ask me. Lights on all night, cars I don't recognize." And then the call dropped. The line just cut out, static, then silence. But her words stuck with me, even as the heat outside pressed in through my window like a second skin. Permanent. What was she talking about? I dialed her back immediately. No answer. Tried again an hour later. Straight to voicemail both times. Her usual cheery recording played, but now it felt jarring, like a smile painted on during a funeral. I tried to stay calm. Told myself maybe I'd forgotten about some maintenance crew. Maybe I'd booked something and never wrote it down. Or maybe she'd just misread a few things, caught some headlights from across the lake. But Nora wasn't the type to make things up. She was grounded. Observant. And the more I sat with it, the more that pit in my stomach grew. The laksa I'd had for dinner suddenly felt like lead. I knew, deep down, I hadn't scheduled any crew. No one should have been there. And then, just a few days later, the real blow came. A digital gut punch I never saw coming. I was just checking my US bank account, getting ready to move some money around, when something caught my eye, this huge deposit I didn't recognize. 450 grand. It stopped me cold. The memo line was short. Cold. Proceeds. 48, Lakeview Drive. And right under that, I noticed something else, an email I hadn't opened yet. It was from some company I'd never heard of before, Summit Property Group. The subject line burned straight into my brain. "Congratulations, Mr. Daniel Brooks, on the successful closing of your property." I froze. My hand started shaking so bad, I dropped my phone. It hit the teak floor and bounced, screen first. When I picked it up, the glass was shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. It looked exactly how I felt, broken. The sharp edges cut into my palm, but the sting didn't register. My chest felt like it had exploded from the inside out, silent, violent, and real. The email had attachments. I opened them slowly. A full sales contract. Closing papers. A power of attorney that looked way too much like my signature. I didn't wait to think. My hands were trembling too much to type, so I used voice control to start a video call with my parents. After a few seconds, the screen stabilized. There they were, right in their living room like nothing had happened. Mom was fussing with a vase of flowers. Dad had a newspaper open in front of him, pretending to read. And Zane. He was in the back, hovering, like a smug little shadow. His eyes flicked to the screen, eager, expectant, almost daring me to react. I held up my cracked phone, voice barely above a whisper. "Explain this." Mom looked up, her face pulling into this expression of fake concern. "Daniel, sweetheart, you look terrible. What's going on?" Dad muttered something about the video connection being poor. And Zane. That smug grin just spread wider across his face. "The cottage," I said, louder this time. My voice was starting to crack, edged with fury. "Summit Property Group. $450,000. What the hell did you do?" The whole act collapsed. Mom, Margaret, set the flowers down and turned toward the screen. Her expression hardened, just like it always did when she decided she was right and the discussion was over. She didn't flinch. "Yes, Daniel. We sold it. Just like that. No apology. No shame. Not even a pause. Like she was telling me they switched cable providers. You've always thrown your money away on that old wreck. It was a black hole. We needed that money. She said it with this cold confidence, like it was the only logical move. The family needs that money to support your brother's future. Zane's app is going to change everything, Daniel. This is his big break. I stared at the screen, watching their faces blur together. I could barely breathe. That cottage, my home, my retreat, my 12 years of sweat and sacrifice, was just a money pit to them. A meaningless thing. I saw the sunrises I used to watch from the porch. Heard the loons call across the lake in my memory. Felt the cool, creaky floorboards under my bare feet. Every piece of it sliced through me like glass. Meaningless, I repeated, barely able to get the word out. My throat burned. That place was 12 years of my life. It was my future. Dad finally opened his mouth. His voice sounded thin, weak, like he didn't even believe what he was saying. It was for the best, son. We had to move quickly. Zane got interest from a serious investor, but it required matching capital. There was no time. And just like that, Zane stepped into the frame, full of himself, grinning like he'd just won a prize. Come on, Daniel. Lighten up. It was just some old dump. Once my app takes off, I'll buy you 10 of those crappy little cabins, okay? You'll thank us one day. You'll see. I don't remember who ended the call. Maybe I did. Maybe the connection just dropped. Either way, I sat there in the thick Singapore heat, shattered phone in my hand, eyes locked on nothing. The night dragged into morning. Gray sunlight began creeping through the blinds, cold and joyless. And in that pale light, something inside me shifted. The pain didn't go away. Not even close. But it started to take shape. Started to feel less like confusion and more like clarity. This wasn't just a desperate move by people who were out of options. This was planned. This was theft, dressed up in the language of family and sacrifice. A memory hit me out of nowhere, months before my trip. That tense family dinner when they were pressuring me for more money for Zane's app. I remember how hollow their eyes looked when I talked about the cottage. How I poured my heart out about what Pinecone meant to me, and they didn't even hear me. They weren't moved. They were measuring. Calculating. I remembered the late-night call I made to my college friend Jenna. She's a corporate lawyer now, sharp as a tack. I told her how it felt, how I was starting to think they saw me as a walking ATM, and the cottage as my vault. They act like it's theirs, I said. Like they're entitled to it. Jenna didn't sugarcoat things. She never does. Then insulate it, Daniel. Build a legal firewall, Jenna had told me. If you're serious about making this retreat real, treat it like a business. Not just a pet project. So that's what we did. Over a series of quiet back and forths, calls, emails, meetings in tucked-away coffee shops, we formed Pinecone Sanctuary, LLC. We transferred the cottage and everything tied to it, deed, ownership, legal rights, from me, Daniel Brooks, private individual, into this new corporate entity. I was listed as the sole managing director, but on paper, it looked like something more complicated. We added layers, corporate filings, a separate mailing address, even a dedicated bank account, so nothing traced directly back to me in the public record. At the time, I felt kind of ridiculous. Like I was being overly paranoid. Who sets up an LLC for a vacation home? It felt like overkill. I even remember feeling a little embarrassed by it. But standing there now, betrayed and hollowed out, that overkill felt like the only solid ground I had left. They thought they sold Daniel Brooks' cottage. What they actually did was try to defraud a legal corporation. And that corporation was me. The flight back to the States was a haze of recycled airplane air and unrelenting fury. Every hour dragged. I downed bad airline coffee and ran the upcoming confrontation over in my mind like a script, polished and rehearsed. The pain didn't fade with time. It sharpened. When I landed, the first person I called was Jenna. We met at her downtown office, a place all glass, concrete, and cold elegance. The stark contrast from Pinecone, the warmth, the wood, the sunlight, wasn't lost on me. Jenna was calm, collected. Listened intently as I laid it all out, the video call, the forged paperwork, the sheer audacity of it. Her jaw tightened with every detail. She'd already reviewed the sales documents I'd forwarded from Singapore. "They're bold, I'll give them that," she said, tapping the fake power of attorney with a manicured nail. "But also incredibly dumb." She let me know she'd already put the supposed buyers, a Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox, and their real estate agent on formal notice. Not from me. But from Pinecone Sanctuary, LLC. The notice was carefully worded, legal to the core. It spoke of a title dispute. It flagged the entire transaction as an unauthorized property transfer. That alone would be enough to freeze everything in place, maybe even stop the release of funds, if it hadn't happened already. With that handled, it was time for the next step. I drove straight to my parents' house. The street looked the same, but it felt different, cold, hollow. Even the crooked mailbox I'd fixed a dozen times looked like it belonged to strangers. Inside, the house had changed. New plush furniture. An absurdly large flat-screen TV on the wall. Mom fluttered around like a hostess showing off a fresh renovation. "Just a little advance on Zane's future success," she said, voice sugary sweet, eyes daring me to question her. Zane was lounging on the couch, phone glued to his ear, spouting startup buzzwords, user growth, synergy, burn rate, like he was pitching to a boardroom. He looked up and gave me a quick, uninterested nod. Dad sat nearby, avoiding my eyes. Mumbled something about how good it was to have me home. I could barely breathe through the act they were putting on. The very next day, Jenna sent them a formal summons, not to their house, but addressed to each of them individually. Margaret, Thomas, and Zane Brooks were invited to her office to discuss a legal matter of urgency. The letterhead read: Law Offices of Jenna Clark and Associates. Subject: Urgent legal matter regarding property at 48, Lakeview Drive. Asset of Pinecone Sanctuary, LLC. They didn't recognize the name. But they would soon enough. When they showed up, I was already waiting. They looked rattled, shoulders stiff, eyes darting. Mom tried to take control right away, her voice echoing too loudly in the conference room. "Daniel, this is nonsense. Call off your little lawyer friend. We'll handle this as a family." The conference table, deep mahogany, antique, felt like a chasm between us. Jenna stayed composed, professional, ice calm. She motioned for them to sit. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks." "Mr. Zane Brooks," she began. "We're here to address the unauthorized and fraudulent attempt to transfer ownership of an asset belonging to my client, Pinecone Sanctuary, LLC. She slid a stack of documents across the table toward them, carefully bound, legally precise. "This concerns the property at 48, Lakeview Drive, commonly known as the Pinecone Cottage." Dad's face drained of color. He stammered, I don't understand. Daniel owned the house. We had power of attorney." He scrambled, looking through his briefcase, trying to produce that forged document like it might still protect them. Zane scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh, come on. It's just a technicality. Paperwork games." He's being dramatic. Jenna didn't even blink. "Actually," she said, her voice sharp and steady, "this," she tapped the papers, "is the official filing for Pinecone Sanctuary, LLC, registered with the Secretary of State 6 months ago. And this," she continued, tapping another document, "is the recorded deed, transferring full ownership of the property from Mr. Daniel Brooks to the LLC, 5 months ago. That was well before your so-called power of attorney was signed. And long before you tried to sell a house you no longer had any right to. She let the silence stretch. The property you attempted to sell, Mrs. Brooks, was not Mr. Daniel Brooks' personal possession at the time of the transaction. It was, and remains, the sole asset of a legally separate corporate entity. And with that, the weight of what they'd done finally started to settle across their faces. Margaret's face drained of all color. That carefully maintained expression of motherly concern began to slip, peeling away to reveal something colder, something harder underneath. "But he owns the LLC, doesn't he?" she said, voice tight. "It's the same thing." That's when I spoke. My voice, to my surprise, was calm. Steady. Not a hint of the nerves that had been chewing at me for weeks. "No, Mother. It's not the same thing. Not even close. And more importantly," I looked her dead in the eye, "the power of attorney you used, the one you forged, I never signed it." Jenna gave a slow, grave nod. "Which brings us to the much more serious issue here, criminal forgery." She laid out another set of papers. My sworn affidavit, signed and notarized in Singapore, clearly stating that I had been out of the country at the exact time the so-called POA was allegedly signed. Alongside it, a preliminary forensic handwriting analysis comparing the forged signature to multiple samples of my actual handwriting. And the results weren't even close. The report pointed out several inconsistencies, uneven angles, unmatched loops, missing strokes. It read like a checklist of red flags. But the worst part wasn't on paper. It was on video. Jenna dimmed the lights in the room and turned to a large monitor mounted on the wall. "Before Mr. Brooks departed for his assignment overseas," she said, her tone quiet and commanding, "he had a new, motion-sensitive security system installed in his home office. It included a discrete camera pointed at his desk." She clicked her mouse. The footage came up, clear, date-stamped, and impossible to ignore. There was my office. My desk. And then, my parents. Margaret, her brow furrowed with concentration, rifling through my papers. Thomas hovered over her shoulder, just as tense. They weren't looking for anything, they were looking for something specific. At one point, Thomas pulled out an old tax form I'd signed. Margaret laid it flat, then grabbed a blank POA form from a stack, clearly one of those generic templates you download off the internet. Then, she did it. She started practicing my signature, sloppily, nervously, on a scratch pad. Back and forth, copying from the real thing to her shaky version. It was painful to watch. Then came Zane. He appeared in the doorway, sharp and impatient. "Are you done yet?" he snapped. "Just get it over with. The investor's waiting." Then, in a final punch to the gut, Thomas pulled an old notary stamp out of a briefcase, probably from one of his failed business ventures. The video wasn't perfect, but you could see it. One of them, hard to tell who in the motion blur, pressed that dusty stamp down onto the forged document. In the darkened room, Margaret let out a strangled gasp. Dad looked like he might pass out, gripping his chest with one hand like the weight of what they'd done had finally landed. And Zane. For once in his life, the cocky grin was gone. His jaw hung open, stunned into silence. All the bravado had vanished. In its place was just raw, unfiltered guilt. That's not, you can't," Margaret stammered, her voice cracking, not out of regret, but from sheer panic. "Oh, I can," I said, every word sharp and deliberate. "And I will. Forgery. Real estate fraud. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Using a defunct notary seal to notarize an illegal document." I leaned in, locking eyes with her. "You didn't just try to sell my house. You tried to sell me out, so Zane could have his shot." My gaze shifted to Zane, who actually flinched like I'd smacked him. That was when Margaret found her voice again, shrill and trembling. "You'd really do this? To your own mother? To your family? After all we've done for you?" I stood then. Slowly. Purposefully. And everything I'd buried over the years, every bruise, every ignored plea, every sacrifice, rose to the surface in a single, razor-sharp moment. "All you've done for me," I said, voice low but steady, heavy with every unspoken truth. "Or everything I've done for this family. All the times I was the one cleaning up your messes while my dreams, my life, got treated like trash." I gestured toward the screen. Toward the footage. Toward the evidence. "You didn't just fake my name on a document, Mom. You tried to rewrite my entire life, just to give Zane another chance to play genius." I looked down at the file folder, the LLC documents, the deed, the timeline. This is me drawing the line. Taking my life back. "And the $480,000 you got from the Wilcoxes?" I added, letting it sink in. "That's now evidence. My company, Pinecone Sanctuary, LLC, is filing for full damages. Legal fees. Restitution." And, Jenna chimed in, her voice crisp as a judge's gavel, "Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox have already been notified of the fraudulent sale. Their legal team is preparing a civil lawsuit for recovery of funds and additional damages." She paused. "And they're also seriously considering criminal charges." The silence after that felt like thunder. Dad was pale, his breathing ragged and loud in the otherwise quiet room. The power dynamic in that room hadn't just shifted, it had imploded. What followed was nothing short of chaos. Margaret went from screaming to sobbing in record time, trying to walk back everything with wild eyes and shaking hands. "Daniel, please," she cried. "You can't do this. We'll lose everything. Your father's health, the press, the embarrassment." Her voice, always so composed, cracked under pressure. Thomas looked like a ghost, sunken in his chair, unable to process the reality smacking him in the face. "But Zane." Zane exploded. "You set us up," he spat, voice tight and trembling. "You've always been jealous. You've always wanted me to fail." I locked eyes with Zane. And for the first time, his usual insults, the old jabs, the bitterness, didn't land. I didn't flinch. "You didn't get set up, Zane," I said, quiet but firm. "You set yourselves up. All of you. Your greed, your sense of entitlement. Mom and Dad's endless belief that your so-called potential was worth burning down everything, and everyone, else to protect. I didn't trap you. I just built a firewall. And none of you were paying enough attention to even notice it was there." Jenna stepped in then, thank God. Her calm, legal tone cut through the emotional chaos like a scalpel. She laid out the facts, plain and unflinching. The Wilcoxes were moving forward with a civil suit. That $480,000. Stolen funds. And they were coming for every penny. Then came the criminal side. Forgery. Wire fraud. Mail fraud. With video evidence this solid, charges weren't just possible, they were likely. And this wasn't something that could be talked away over Sunday dinner. My parents needed to find real legal help. Fast. There would be no sweeping this under the rug. The days that followed blurred into one long, exhausting stretch of paperwork, attorney updates, and a wall of silence from my parents' end. But the Wilcoxes? They came out swinging. They were a retired couple who had poured their entire life savings into what they believed was going to be their peaceful dream home by the lake. And now, they were furious. Heartbroken. And legally armed. Jenna kept me in the loop, of course. That's how I found out what my parents had done with the money. They'd already blown through a big chunk of the deposit, dumped it straight into Zane's company, which, it turns out, had no product, no customers, and no plan. Just promises. Now they were neck-deep in a financial and legal disaster they'd created for themselves. And the image they'd spent a lifetime building, the respectable couple, the generous church members, the upstanding neighbors, began to crack. Word started spreading. Even though Jenna had handled the media side carefully, protecting me while letting the truth come out, whispers turned into full-blown gasps. Their church group. Their friends. Our extended family. People were stunned. And Margaret, who had always prized appearances above all else, had to watch that polished mask shatter in public. Then came the messages. Voicemails. Texts. Rambling emails full of guilt, desperation, and blame. How could you be so heartless, Daniel? Mom sobbed in one voicemail. We're your family. We'll lose everything. Dad wrote a long, meandering email, half apology, half plea. He wanted a loan. One last favor. He wanted me to make it all stop. Each message was another attempt to yank me back into their chaos. To make me responsible for the damage they'd caused. I felt it, the old ache. That deep, almost automatic reflex to fix things. To make the pain stop. I could hear Dad's broken voice in my head. See Mom unraveling. And for a second, I almost gave in. But then I looked up at the watercolor painting hanging above my desk. Pinecone Pines. A soft, quiet image Jenna had given me. A reminder of everything I'd built. Everything I'd nearly lost. And I remembered the cold, calculated look in their eyes during that video call. I remembered Zane's sneer. No, I whispered to no one, just the stillness of my apartment. Not this time. This time, they'd carry the weight. Not me. I asked Jenna to handle all communication going forward. I changed my number. It felt like amputating a part of myself, bloody and brutal, but necessary. Like cutting off a limb that had turned toxic. And then something unexpected happened. A phone call. From Aunt Linda, my mom's younger sister. She'd always kept a respectful distance from Margaret's never-ending drama. Pragmatic, no nonsense. Not one for gossip. She'd heard the rumors and decided to call me directly. I told her everything. No filters. No spin. Just the truth. She listened. Quiet. Patient. When I finished, there was a long pause. Daniel, she said at last, her voice tinged with sadness, your mother's always had a blind spot where Zane's concerned. And she always looked at you like the one who could handle anything. The one who'd just absorb it all. She sighed. I'm sorry it took something this awful for you to finally say enough. Her words hit deeper than I expected. Like a bomb on a wound I didn't even realize was still open. It was the first time in a long while that someone from the family truly saw me. Not as a fixer. Not as a wallet. But as a human being. It felt like the start of something new. Something real. Eventually, the legal mess started to clear. Pinecone Sanctuary LLC was officially, legally, and publicly declared the rightful owner of the property. That part was done. With Jenna's help, the Wilcoxes got their full judgment, every dime they were owed, plus legal fees and damages. My parents? They had to sell their home. The one I grew up in. The place that held so many mixed-up memories. They downsized to a tiny apartment across town. Zane's so-called revolutionary app. It fizzled the moment the money stopped flowing. Without the stolen cash propping it up, his genius project disappeared like smoke. He ended up getting a regular desk job. The kind of thing he used to mock. He hated it. You could feel the bitterness pouring off him like sweat. And as for the criminal side, charges were filed. Given their age, and with Thomas's health going downhill, my parents ended up pleading guilty to lesser charges. They didn't go to prison, but they got slapped with heavy fines, probation, and court-ordered counseling. Their freedom remained, sure, but the lives they once knew were gone for good. The first time I returned to Pinecone after all of it, the weight of everything hit me hard. That familiar scent of pine trees and damp soil still hung in the air. The loon still cried out across the lake, just like always. But the moment I stepped into the cottage, the atmosphere felt off, stale somehow. Like it was holding on to the ghost of what they'd done. I flung open every window, letting the cold, clean lake air rush in and chase away more than just dust. As I stepped outside, I ran my hand along the wooden deck I'd built with my own 2 hands. The sun had warmed it up, and board by board, I could feel the memory of every hour I'd spent building it. It wasn't just a dream anymore, it had become a symbol. Of grit. Of starting over. Of taking my life back. The eco-retreat plans. They were back in motion. Only now, the idea had a deeper meaning. I wasn't just building a place for others to rest, I was building proof that choosing yourself, even when it hurts, can be the most powerful thing you ever do. Of course, the scars are still there. When your own family turns on you, that kind of wound doesn't vanish. It dulls with time, but it never disappears. It creeps in on rainy days, or shows up as a quiet ache during holidays I no longer celebrate the same way. But I'm moving forward, laying a foundation not just out of lumber and stone, but out of hard-earned peace. I've finally learned that saying no is enough. I don't need to explain it. And boundaries, the ones I set now, aren't cruel. They're proof that I respect myself. That old weak spot in me, the part that once begged for their approval like a kid desperate to be picked. It's still in there. Just a faint scar now. It doesn't lead me anymore. These days, I look inward for that approval. I find it in the pride that comes from doing good work. I feel it when I'm with people who truly value me, like Jenna, or Aunt Linda. Folks who see me for who I am, not who they want me to be. When family cuts you deep, it can leave a hollow space inside. But I've realized that emptiness can also become the soil where a stronger, truer version of you finally starts to grow. And yeah, digging out that space hurts like hell. But what you gain from it, the clear, honest view of the life you're building on your own terms, is worth more than anything I lost.